Hello and welcome. I'm Asuma Katauka and you are watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. The Israeli military conducted a raid in southern Syria, seizing weapons and questioning several suspects involved in weapons trafficking. The raid took place on Saturday, according to Israeli officials. A Russian missile strike on Mykolaiv in southern Ukraine injured at least 7 people and damaged dozens of homes and civilian infrastructure. 2 of the injured were hospitalized after the late Saturday attack, according to the regional governor. Iran's commander-in-chief stated that threats from Israel remain, stressing the importance of taking every threat seriously. This comes after the Israel-US strikes on nuclear facilities in June and Tehran's retaliatory missile and drone attacks. EU Foreign Affairs Chief Kaja Kallas condemned videos showing emaciated Israeli hostages as appalling and barbaric. She called for the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages and for humanitarian aid to reach Gaza. Russia's Ministry for Emergency Services lifted a tsunami warning for the Kamchatka Peninsula after a 7.0 magnitude earthquake hit the Kuril Islands. Although the waves were expected to be low, people were advised to move away from the shore. The Russian and Chinese navies are carrying out artillery and anti-submarine drills in the Sea of Japan as part of scheduled joint exercises. The drills come after US President Donald Trump ordered 2 nuclear submarines to be positioned in response to Russian comments, but the drills were planned well in advance. The Office of Special Counsel has opened an investigation into Jack Smith, the Justice Department's special counsel, over alleged partisan political activity. The inquiry focuses on Smith's actions during his criminal cases against President Donald Trump, with the agency able to impose fines and sanctions but not criminal penalties. Israel's far-right National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir visited the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound in Jerusalem and claimed to have prayed there. Challenging long-standing rules under the status quo arrangement, Jews can visit the site but are not allowed to pray. Israeli National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir has reportedly called for a complete Israeli takeover of the Gaza Strip, including the formal extension of Israeli sovereignty over the territory. The statement was made in a video distributed by his spokesperson. This came as Ben-Gvir visited the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound in Jerusalem, also known as the Temple Mount, on the Jewish day of mourning for the destruction of the first and second temples, which were historically located at the site. Videos sent by a small Jewish organization called the Temple Mount Administration showed the minister as well as other Jewish visitors walking the compound and singing. Let's take a listen into what the Israeli National Security Minister had to say.
סרטוני הזוועה של החמאס באים על רקע דבר אחד, הניסיון שלהם ליצור לחץ על מדינת ישראל. ואני אומר דווקא מכאן, מהר הבית, המקום בו הוכחנו שאפשר לעשות ריבונות ומשילות. דווקא מכאן צריך להעביר מסר ולדאוג שכבר היום כובשים את כל רצועת עזה, מכריזים ריבונות בכל רצועת עזה, מורידים כל חמאסניק ומעודדים הגירה מרצון. רק בצורה הזאת.
Now we're joined by Jonathan Hoffman. He's a former vice president of Zionist Federation of the United Kingdom, joins us live from London. Thank you, Jonathan, for joining us today. Good to see you. Now, how significant is Itamar Ben-Gvir's call for the complete Israeli takeover of the Gaza Strip in context of the current Israeli-Palestinian tensions? Jonathan, could you hear me?
I can hear you, but I can't see the program still.
Oh, is it okay if you answer my question right now?
Yes, but I would prefer to be able to see the program.
Right. I'll ask my guest relation to help you with the link. Meanwhile, let's move on with this discussion. Jonathan, how significant is Itamar Ben-Gvir's call for the complete Israeli takeover of the Gaza Strip in context of the current Israeli-Palestinian tensions?
Yes, good morning. The Israeli cabinet is a coalition cabinet, and it includes members with different views to the mainstream Prime Minister view, Benjamin Netanyahu. Ben-Gvir is known to be somebody with more pronounced views than the Prime Minister. So I don't personally take what he says as mainstream policy of the Israeli government, because you have to look at what the Israeli government does and what the Prime Minister says, not what some members of the coalition says. So I don't think that annexation of Gaza is currently on the table, although that's not to rule it out in the future.
And Jonathan, building on that, do you think this proposal could escalate the situation further, his claims?
Well, we're at a very difficult stage, I think. You've seen that 3 countries, Great Britain, Canada and France, are saying that they will recognize the Palestinian state in September at the United Nations General Meeting. The announcement in Britain even said that if the Palestinians, if there's no peace agreement, then they will recognize the Palestinian state. In other words, that gives an incentive for Hamas not to release the hostages. So we're at a very difficult point. Also, opinion in the US Congress is beginning to move slightly away from supporting Israel, which is important. And in Gaza itself, the Israeli soldiers are fatigued. They've nearly had 2 years of being in Gaza. So we're at a difficult point. It's difficult to say. There might be an escalation because Israel will feel that the pressure is so much on Israel that it has to escalate the conflict in Gaza. But for the moment, it's hard to predict.
And Jonathan, now looking back at Minister Ben-Gvir's visit to the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound that has sparked controversy, how do you assess the political and symbolic significance of this visit, particularly in light of its timing?
Well, the mosque always has the potential to inflame opinion amongst the Arabs. They frequently believe that Israel wants to take over the Temple Mount, which was also the site of the Jewish temple, and rebuild the temple. And that story has the potential to inflame rhetoric, inflame terrorism. So whilst, in my view, Israelis have the right to go up to the Temple Mount and pray, the fact is that under the agreement with Jordan, who looks after the Temple Mount, they do not have the right to pray, or at least they mustn't move their lips to be seen praying. So I think what Ben-Gvir did was inevitably might inflame opinion. It was a dangerous thing to do, but personally, I think he has the right to do it.
Thank you very much, Jonathan Hoffman, for sharing that insight. Please stay with us as we stay on the topic. Now, the European Union's Foreign Affairs Chief Kaja Kallas is condemning the release of disturbing videos by Hamas and Islamic Jihad. The footage shows visibly emaciated Israeli hostages, an image Kaja Kallas calls appalling and a sign of Hamas's barbarity. In a post on X, Kaja Kallas demanded the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages. She also called for Hamas to disarm and end its control in Gaza. The EU diplomat added that while the hostages' suffering is unacceptable, it's equally urgent to allow large-scale humanitarian aid to reach civilians in need. Now we go back to our guest discussion with Jonathan Hoffman. He's a former vice president of Zionist Federation of the United Kingdom. Thank you, Jonathan, for staying with us. Now, how do you interpret the European Union's strong condemnation for Hamas's actions, particularly regarding the release of disturbing hostage videos?
Well, the hostage videos are incredibly disturbing. There are still, on my calculation, around 20 hostages still alive in Gaza. And clearly, Hamas has made these videos and released these videos in order to raise the pressure on Israel at a time, as we discussed, when the pressure on Israel is already stronger than it's ever been. It's absolutely to be condemned, but, you know, the Israeli government is in a very difficult position because it has two aims. Number one, to release the hostages. Number two, to defeat Hamas. And those two aims can be conflicting. The greater the intensity of the attacks on Hamas in Gaza, the more likely the hostages are to be caught up, to be wounded or even killed. So it's an incredibly difficult balancing act for the Israeli government. And, you know, nobody can envy them, the government, the task of trying to get this balance right. Maybe it's an impossible balance to get right, but nobody can envy the difficulty of the task in trying to get this balance correct.
Yes, and Jonathan, now you've also mentioned that it's very difficult, the situation, and meanwhile Kaja Kallas has called for both the release of hostages and increased humanitarian aid access to Gaza. How realistic is it for Israel to balance both these calls while maintaining its security priorities?
It's incredibly difficult. I mean, the Jewish Sabbath is on a Saturday, as you know, and after the end of every Sabbath on a Saturday evening, there's massive demonstrations from the families of the hostages. I saw yesterday they blocked the Ayalon Highway, which is the main motorway or highway out of Tel Aviv. So the pressure is massive, and it's impossible to get this balance right. The harder the attacks on Hamas in Gaza, the more likely are the hostages to be injured or even killed. The one point is that when there are no hostages left in Gaza, then Israel would be able to pull out all the stops and attack as strongly as it wants. But nobody wants that eventuality to come. We want the hostages have to be released, and it's worth remembering that if the hostages were released today, all the hostages, then the conflict would stop. But so far, Hamas has not accepted that.
Thank you very much, Jonathan Hoffman, for sharing that insight and staying with us throughout our news. Now we move on to our next news. Tensions are escalating in northern Syria after an attack on the city of Manbij. Syria's defense ministry accused the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces, or SDF, of launching a rocket barrage on a military outpost, injuring 4 troops and 3 civilians. The SDF, however, denied the accusation, claiming they were responding to an unprovoked artillery attack by factions within Syrian government ranks. This exchange of blame comes just months after the SDF and the Syrian government signed a landmark deal to integrate Kurdish forces into state institutions, aiming to unite the country after over a decade of conflict. The deal signed in March set the stage for a potential merger of Kurdish-led forces with the Damascus government, but key details about how that integration will happen remain unresolved. Now we're joined by Thomas Porteous. He's an anchor and correspondent at NewsX World. Thomas, what more can you tell us about the situation in Syria?
Yes, Asuma, more instability, more accusations in a post-Assad Syria, this time in the north of the country, and this follows a rocket attack on the town, or near the town of Manbij, where several civilians and soldiers were injured. As you've mentioned previously, the two parties blaming each other, that being the Kurdish-led SDF and the Syrian government, both sides now blame each other. This interaction here and these events demonstrate how fragile this ceasefire, this accord was for both the Kurdish forces to work and the government to now work together. Really is. The idea was previously to unite their forces and build peace in their country. However, this seems to be much further away than expected. They disagree how to do this, how to integrate these two forces. The Syrian, the SDF, obviously a US backed group. They want to group together under the National Army. However, the government wants to split them up. This matters obviously because it shows how fragile this peace deal really is, given the fighting before Assad was ousted last year. It's also complicated by Turkey, which doesn't trust the SDF. Turkey obviously has a huge influence in Syria and might use any excuse to attack the SDF. So that is potential here. This new attack and this new disagreement shows how fragile and how high tensions still really remain. We saw just a couple of weeks ago the violence in the south of Syria, and now we're seeing more disruption, more violence in the north. So Syria under al-Shara certainly has a long way to go, and we will of course bring you every single update we can from Syria and the regions surrounding it.
Thank you very much, Thomas Porteous, for sharing that insight. Now we move on to our next news. The commander-in-chief of Iran's military, Amir Hatami, has said that threats from Israel persist, according to state media. In June, Israel and the U.S. launched strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities during the 12-day war, in which Tehran retaliated against Israel with several barrages of missiles and drones. The commander-in-chief of Iran's military has said to have emphasized the importance of remaining vigilant, suggesting that even minimal threats should be treated with maximum seriousness. He reportedly reaffirmed Iran's readiness, pointing to the continued operational status of the country's missile and drone capabilities. This comes after Israel's defense minister, Israel Katz, has previously issued a warning indicating that further action against Iran could be taken if new threats were perceived. Now we're joined by guest Robinder Sachdev for this discussion. He's an international affairs expert. Thank you, Robinder, for joining us today. Good to see you. Now, given this ongoing tensions and recent military exchanges between Israel and Iran, how do you view the current state of security in between them?
Thank you, Suma. Pleasure to be with you. I think the state of security, if we were to use the term, remains fragile. Okay, though the tensions have lowered, lessened substantially after this bout of Israel-Iranian exchange, wherein definitely Iran has suffered major damages. But Iran has not been completely, cowed down. And also for its domestic audiences, and of course in the wider region, with its proxies or affinity groups, Iran needs to maintain a posture of strength. That said, what the Iranian chief is saying is something very elementary. He's saying that even if there's a 1% chance of any, aggression, we have to remain vigilant for that. And that's a fact for any country in the world. Even if there's a 1% chance that somebody could strike you, you remain in a stage of certain readiness or preparedness. Now, that said, there are, of course, there is the fog of war, you could say, or the fog of claims right now also going on, wherein Iran's, drone manufacturing production capabilities, Iran's missile production facilities capabilities, how much have they been damaged, or how much have they been able to resume or are continuing. That said, Iran obviously wants to convey a picture that it has suffered minimal least damage and it continues on its path wherever it is. But yes, Iran has lowered the rhetoric. What the army chief said, it was something he said in a firm way, but I see that it was not like saber rattling kind of a statement.
And Robinder, now looking back at Iran's readiness to act and Israel's warnings, now what are the prospects for a long-term resolution to these hostilities now?
Oh, great question. I don't see, honestly, a resolution not coming, but perhaps some kind of an equilibrium stage could be reached, right? Wherein these tensions could lower down, but they will still keep simmering. I mean, there's several contributory factors here, including the politics within the Arab states, between Arab states and Iran, Saudi, UAE, their Iranian relations, the issue of Palestine. That is one key issue in this region. So between all of these aspects and what's happening in Gaza, I do not expect any resolution, one would say, to the situation in the Middle East. But yes, what we could expect is hopefully some kind of an equilibrium wherein the chances of all-out wars are reduced, but still there is amazing amount of reconstruction or a way forward has to be found with regards to the people of Gaza and what's happening in Gaza. So variables are out there, very severe variables, deep, entrenched interests and emotions. So one doesn't see a resolution happening soon, but what one would hope for is some kind of an equilibrium at a lower degree of tensions in this region.
Thank you, Robinder, for sharing that insight. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian arrives in Islamabad for an official visit aimed at strengthening ties with Pakistan. The visit focuses on enhancing cooperation in trade, energy, and regional security amid rising tensions following recent Israeli-US strikes on Iranian nuclear sites and Tehran's retaliatory attacks. Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif welcomes President Pezeshkian at the Prime Minister's house with a guard of honor, with both leaders are set to hold bilateral talks and lead delegation-level discussions. Several MOUs are expected to be signed, followed by a joint press conference. Pakistan and Iran on Sunday have agreed to boost bilateral trade with the goal of reaching an annual trade volume of $8 billion, calling it a new phase of strategic economic partnership, according to a statement from the Commerce Ministry. Ministers from both sides stressed the need to boost use of trade corridors and border facilities, highlighting the advantages of regional trade. They described geography as a strategic advantage to note that regional and global challenges are bringing Iran and Pakistan closer together. Now we go back to our guest discussion with Robinder Sachdev. He's an international affairs expert. Thank you, Robinder, for staying with us. Now, what's your reaction towards this continuing bilateral ties, close ties of Pakistan and Iran?
Thank you. I think, and I see it as, a step forward in the relations between the two countries. They're trying, and if to note, I think it's the first overseas trip of the Iranian president, right, Pezeshkian. It's his first overseas trip, and normally when any leader goes to his first foreign trip after assuming office, it's always seen with some degree of symbolism and, strategic context. So in that sense, this visit to Pakistan is definitely to be noted, and also to be noted is the warm welcome that Pakistan has accorded to him. The Prime Minister has gone down to the airport to receive him, and with his other cabinet ministers. And when actually he went to the other city, Lahore, the Iranian president, in Lahore, the ex-Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif, who's a brother of this president, Shahbaz, was there at the airport to receive him with other dignitaries. So in a way, Pakistan is laying out the proverbial red carpet for the Iranian leader. That's one. But Pakistan does many things which are layers within layers. Iran and Pakistan have some common interests also, if we were to look at that, especially, let's say, in the region of Balochistan. The Balochistan on the Pakistan side and the Balochistan on Iranian side. In both the territories, there are separatist movements. The Pakistan Baluchis go across to Iran and seek shelter there, and the Baluchis in Iran, who are insurgents, come over to the Pakistan side and seek shelter here. So it could be in the interest of both these nations to, strengthen that border security mechanism. That's one. But also for Iran, and it's notable to see the statement of the president, he said that our relations with Pakistan will help us also to integrate with the Silk Route that China is building on the BRI. Okay, so, and that Silk Route could take us here, as well as we could extend it to Europe via Iran. So that means Iran is looking to, let's say, integrate deeper structurally in some senses with China. So that's another element of it. The element for Pakistan is to figure out and play a kind of a balancing role, little bit tightrope. Also, with regards to its relations with Iran, because Americans are unhappy with Iran, right? And Pakistan wants to cozy up with America, or is cozying up with America. Similarly, Pakistan depends on financial help from Saudi, from the Arab Emirates. And Saudis and the Arab Emiratis are especially also not very happy with Iran at times. So Pakistan is playing that, is playing a role where it seeks to kind of position once again itself on the basis of its geography in an important context in the geopolitics of the region.
Thank you very much, Robinder Sachdev, for joining us today and sharing your insight throughout our news as international affairs expert. Now, well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring more news updates from around the world.